Hello my gorgeous friends of Webflow, it's your friendly neighborhood Francesco from Supercyto here. In the first lesson of this GSAP series, we talked about all the fundamentals, triggers, actions, targets, and compared the classic Webflow interactions with the new GSAP powered ones. And if you remember, I briefly mentioned something that probably caught your attention, that annoying flickering that sometimes happens when you use a page load animation. Since then, Webflow has actually shipped an automatic update to help prevent what's called FOUC, which is flash of unstyled content, in GSAP-powered interactions on published sites. Which is awesome, but in some real-world setups, especially on heavier pages or more complex layouts, you might still notice a little flicker on the very first page load. So, in today's lesson, we're going to take full control. We'll break down why that flicker happens, and I'll show you a simple reusable pattern you can apply on any project to get a perfectly clean page load animation, even in those edge cases where the automatic handling isn't enough. If you're looking forward to it as much as I am, stick around, and if you find my videos helpful and want to support my work, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. But now, if you're ready, let's dive in. For this example, we're using a free Webflow template created by the Webflow team, called Elysian Tennis. You'll find the link in the description. From this template, we removed the original page load interaction built with the classic method, and we replaced it with a page load interaction built entirely with GSAP. Now, the specific animation we are using here is not the main focus of this lesson. Our goal is to fix the flickering issue, not to obsess over the aesthetics of this one sequence. But before we talk about how and then why to solve the problem, let's quickly walk through the actions inside the interaction, so you know exactly what's happening under the hood. First, open the Interactions panel. At the bottom, make sure you've selected Interactions with GSAP from the dropdown. Then, on the left sidebar, click the little lightning icon to open the list of interactions. Here, you can see the only GSAP interaction we've created for this project so far. Page load, showing text and video, the one we're using for this animation. If you're curious about my naming conventions and how I structure these labels, I go in depth on that in lesson 1 of this course, so feel free to check that out. Let's click on this interaction. On the right, we get the full list of actions that make up this page load animation. There are 4 actions in total, each with a short, clear, descriptive name, so it's easy to understand the role it plays inside the whole sequence. The first one's called navlink slide in. As the name suggests, this one targets all elements with the class nav_link. In this case, the 4 links in the navbar, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. We're animating them from bottom to top, with duration 1 second, easing expo out, which I personally love for this kind of entrance animation, stagger enabled, with offset time, so each link starts 0.1 seconds after the previous one. Split text also enabled with split by word and mask on. Now you might be wondering, why split by word if every link is literally just one word? Short answer, not because of a brilliant strategy. We were just a bit lazy. Instead of setting the overflow property to hidden on the navlink link block and then animating the text element inside it, we applied the transform directly on the navlink and used split text with masking to get the same masked slide-in feeling for free. We also set a delay of 0.1 seconds before this action starts. This has nothing to do with the flickering issue we're going to solve, but it gives us a nice excuse to tease one of the upcoming lessons: how to properly synchronize actions on the timeline so your animations feel truly professional and visually balanced. Stay tuned for that. The second action is called brand logo slide in, and it's very similar to the previous one. Here we're animating the element with the class nav_logo, the brand image in the center of the navbar. And these are the settings. Duration 1 second, easing expo out, start time 0 seconds on the timeline, direction from bottom to top. The difference is that this time we cannot use split text. It only works for text elements, as the name suggests. So, to get that same masked effect, we manually set overflow to hidden on the link block that wraps the logo image. For the main heading, our creativity with names is still super wild. This action's called heading slide in, and it targets the only H1 on the page and moves it from bottom to top, uses split text by word with masking, uses stagger so each word appears 0.1 seconds after the previous one, uses a duration of 1.2 seconds, and uses back out as easing, just to make the movement a bit more playful and dynamic. The interesting part here is timing. Even though the timeline UI still has some limitations and doesn't always help us visualize this perfectly, this action is set up so that it ends exactly where the first action ends. We've used the same logic for the last action too, so everything converges nicely at the same final moment. And finally, we have video fade in, where we switch things up just a little. This one targets the video underscore wrap element and sets a duration of 1.2 seconds, a delay of 0.2 seconds, and the easing this time is power 3 out. And we animate both opacity and scale. So we have our 4 actions: nav links sliding in with stagger and masking, brand logo sliding in from the center, heading words sliding in with a nice staggered motion, and video fading and scaling in. All timed so that the whole sequence feels like one cohesive animation. At this point, you can preview everything from the timeline and use the preview mode to see how it behaves on page load. And this is where the problem starts to show up. Even with a nice synchronized animation, you might still run into that annoying flicker on page load when using GSAP for this kind of interaction. And just to be super clear, this doesn't happen inside the Webflow designer and not even in preview mode. The issue shows up on the published site, on the live link, where the browser has to deal with real loading times, external scripts, heavier assets, all the good stuff that comes with an actual page load. So, now that you clearly know how this page load animation is structured, in the next section we're going to focus exactly on that flickering issue. What's really happening behind the scenes on the live page and how to get rid of it in a clean, reliable, reusable way. So that's where the flicker really lives. Time to find out what's hiding behind it. We've all seen what it looks like. It's that quick, annoying flash that happens right before your page load animation starts. So what's actually causing it? And more importantly, how can we fix it? Let's start from the beginning. When you use GSAP to create a page load animation, GSAP needs a brief moment to apply the initial conditions, things like the starting opacity, position, or transform values you defined in your animation. Until that happens, your elements are still being displayed exactly as defined in your CSS styles inside Webflow. So, for a fraction of a second, between when the page starts rendering and when GSAP applies those initial states, the elements appear in their final positions, completely visible, before suddenly jumping to the starting state of the animation. That jump is what we see as the flicker. And the heavier your page is, meaning the more content, animations, or custom code it includes, the more noticeable that flicker becomes, because the browser simply takes longer to load and execute everything. That's why I used a real Webflow template instead of a minimal demo section. It's a more realistic environment, and it clearly shows what happens when the browser has more things to process before GSAP kicks in. So now we understand why it happens. Let's see how to fix it. The principle is actually very simple. While GSAP is getting ready and setting up its initial states, we can help it out with a little CSS. What do I mean by that? Instead of trying to hide each element that will be animated, which would be messy and make things harder to manage, will hide the inner wrapper that contains all of those elements. In other words, we'll temporarily make that wrapper invisible until GSAP takes control. The key idea is to set its opacity to 0 using CSS. But we don't do this inside Webflow's designer because that would make the wrapper invisible while we are working on the project, and it's not great for editing. And of course, we also don't do it inside the GSAP interaction itself, because GSAP still needs a moment to apply the initial states. And if we used GSAP to hide the wrapper, we'd just move the flicker from the inner elements to the wrapper itself. So where do we put these lines of CSS? We add them directly in the page settings, inside a section called Inside Head Tag. Here's why this works. CSS inside the head of the page is read and applied by the browser before the rest of the page content is rendered. So, by the time the page visually appears, the wrapper's opacity is already set to 0, meaning that none of the elements inside it will flash or appear too soon, even for a single frame. This fix literally takes just 3 lines of code, written inside a pair of opening and closing style tags. Before we write anything though, we need to identify the wrapper we're going to target. We want to hide the innermost container that includes all the elements being animated. But why the innermost one? Because it gives us a clear reference point. Wide enough to cover everything involved in the animation, but not so wide that we start hiding elements that have nothing to do with it. It's just about finding the right balance. Now, in this particular case, some of our animated elements are inside the navbar and others are inside the hero section. So, the closest common parent that contains all of them would actually be the page wrapper itself. But that's probably too broad. We'd be hiding the entire page when the issue really concerns only those 2 sections. So, let's find a good compromise. We'll focus on 2 wrappers instead, the nav wrapper and the section is video. Those 2 alone will be enough to completely eliminate the flicker. Let's start with the nav wrapper. Inside our style tags, we simply write the name of the class, preceded by a dot, because that's how CSS identifies classes, and then open and close a pair of curly brackets. Between those brackets, we'll write opacity, 0, semicolon. That's it. We've just told the browser, hey, when this page starts loading, make this element invisible. And now let's move on to the section is video element. Since we're applying the same property, opacity 0, we don't need to rewrite the entire CSS block again. We can simply combine both selectors, separated by a comma. And for clarity, we'll also add a space after the comma to keep things tidy and readable. So it becomes .nav_wrapper, .section.is-video, and between curly brackets, opacity, 0, semicolon. And here's one thing to be careful about. The element section is video has both a class and a combo class. That means we need to write both class names, one after the other, with no spaces in between. So .section.is-video. Boom, done. Also, keep in mind that sometimes the class names you see inside the Webflow designer aren't exactly the same as the ones used in the published site. If you're not sure what I mean, I've got a full video explaining everything you need to know about classes in Webflow. You'll find the link in the description. Now, all this CSS stuff works fine, but let's be honest. Typing class names manually can get messy, especially with combo classes or complex selectors. So, is there an easier, safer way? Of course there is. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you probably already guessed the answer. Attributes. Instead of relying on classes, we can assign a simple custom attribute to all the elements we want to target. For example, let's give both the nav wrapper and the section is video elements the same attribute, remove-flicker. We apply it once to the first element, then copy and paste it on the other. And now, in our CSS, we can replace all those long class selectors with just one. based on the attribute. That's it. In CSS, attributes are targeted with square brackets, and this selector will apply to any element that has our remove flicker attribute, no matter how many there are or what their classes are. Now all that's left to do is publish the site and see if our trick worked. If everything's been set up correctly, that annoying flicker should finally be gone. So let's publish the project and take a look at the live link. Wait a second, our navbar and hero section are gone. Any idea what went wrong? Or maybe what's missing? Well, it's actually pretty simple. With our CSS, we told the browser to hide every element that has the remove flicker attribute by setting its opacity to 0, but we never told it to show them again. In other words, there is currently nothing and no one setting the opacity back to 1 once GSAP has applied all its initial states and is ready to start the animation. So our elements stay invisible forever. Not ideal, right? How do we fix this? Let's think about it. We need a way to bring the opacity of all those remove flicker elements back to 1, right at the moment when the animation is ready to play. And who knows exactly when that moment is? GSAP, of course. So, instead of relying on extra code or manual tweaks, we can just use the GSAP interaction itself to bring those elements back to full opacity. Here's how to do it. Open your GSAP interaction, add a new action and let's call it, you guessed it, remove flicker. For the target type, select attribute. In the attribute name field, type remove-flicker. That way it will target every element with that attribute. Now, we want this to happen instantly. No easing, no fancy transitions. The moment the animation can start, those wrappers should immediately become visible again. So, we set duration 0, start 0, type 2, because we want to animate to a new value, property opacity, value 100%. That's it. No delays, no transitions, just a quick switch from invisible to visible, exactly when GSAP says go. Now, publish the project again and reload the live link. This time, even if you refresh the page or open it in a new tab, the flicker is gone. Completely. Forever. No more flashing navbar, no more jumping headings. Just a smooth, clean page load animation. Our little war against flickering is officially won. Before we wrap things up, there's one last refinement we can apply to make our method truly bulletproof. This course might be free, but that doesn't mean the information shouldn't be pro level. Accurate, complete, and something you can confidently apply in real-world projects. And honestly, sharing everything I know, even the tiny details, is a big part of my mission here. So, let's take a moment to understand why we need this extra step and how to implement it. The goal is simple. We want our CSS to run only if JavaScript is actually active on the page. Why? Because if the user has disabled JavaScript in their browser settings, which happens more often than you'd think, GSAP won't run at all. And if GSAP doesn't run, we don't want to hide anything with CSS. Otherwise, our content would stay permanently invisible. In short, no JavaScript, no GSAP. So the CSS should also stay out of the way. Here's the quick tweak. In the snippet we added earlier, we just need to modify our selector slightly. Instead of this, we'll write this. Now, what exactly does that mean? HTML is the tag that represents the entire page. w-mod-js is the class Webflow automatically adds to the HTML element when JavaScript is enabled in the browser, or more precisely, when it's successfully running on the page. By combining the two and adding a space before remove flicker, we're telling the browser, when the HTML element has the class w-mod-js, select all the elements that have the remove flicker attribute. That small change ensures that our CSS rule only applies when JavaScript is active, keeping everything visible if it's not. And with that tweak in place, now we've really finished. Time to celebrate, maybe by watching the next episode of our favorite anime. For research purposes, of course. But before that, let's do a quick recap of everything we learned today. Then we'll move to our classic outro. And by popular demand, I'll finally share another track from my Spotify playlist. So, quick recap. The flickering happens because GSAP needs a short moment to apply the initial states of your animation, while the browser is still rendering your CSS styles. By hiding your wrappers with a tiny bit of CSS and then revealing them instantly through your GSAP payload interaction, you remove that visual glitch once and for all, even in more complex setup. On top of that, this approach is safe. If JavaScript doesn't run for any reason, your content stays visible. If it does run, your animations start clean without any unwanted flash. If you want to explore this setup yourself, there's a clonable project linked in the description. So you can play with it, tweak the animations and experiment with different timing and easing functions. And remember, Webflow's automatic FOUC handling for GSAP interactions will already cover many simple use cases. What we built here is a fully controlled pattern you can rely on when you need that extra level of precision and stability. In the next lesson, we'll take a closer look at the interaction settings, from what each control option actually means to how you can use delay, speed and jump to in clever ways to make your animations feel more natural and responsive. Oh, before we wrap up, it's been a while since I shared a song from my Spotify playlist, so here's today's recommendation. Remember Everything by Five Finger Death Punch, link in the description. Perfect track if you've spent the last hour debugging animations and need to scream into the void. In a productive way, of course. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell for more Webflow tips and tricks. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Matane!